everybody. Welcome to the Route Consultant Weekly webinar. If you've never been here before, my name is Josh Gregory. I am the Vice President of Education here at Route Consultant. So our team ran hundreds of routes across the country on both the P&D and the line haul side. And today what we're really focused on is helping current contractors really understand all of the changes that continue to happen in this industry and find the best ways to be profitable, be successful, and thrive in any environment that FedEx creates for us. And then as a new buyer, if you're coming into the space learning for the first time, we want to make sure that you understand what you're getting into and that we really help you get up to speed and find the right ways to get into the business and do so successfully. Now, for everybody who's here all the time, welcome back. And again, whether you're brand new and this is your first time or you're here every week, we always want this to be a place that people can come, listen to some updates on some things that are happening in the industry, and then ask questions as those come up and make sure that we provide a forum and a place for everyone to get together and ask questions. And speaking of that, I will have time to answer questions live, but before we get too much farther, before I forget, I do have a disclaimer that I have to read as I do every week. So Route Consultant is not endorsed by and is not recommended by Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. Route Consultant is not sponsored by, is not approved by, is not associated with, and has no connection whatsoever with Federal Express Corporation, FedEx Ground, or Amazon. All that to say, we definitely want this to be a place where you can learn, ask questions about all of those companies, but have to give that official disclaimer. So like I was mentioning, there will be a Q&A at the end when we get to it, or even before we get to it. At any point when I'm talking today, feel free to type questions in and I'll get to them at the Q&A at the end. Just make sure that as you're doing so, put it in that Q&A button at the bottom of the window. If you put it in the chat, I'll miss it. Or if you just raise your hand, I'll miss it. So if you want to make sure to get your questions answered, type those in the Q&A. I'll also say, if you're watching this later on YouTube, you can always email us at info@routeconsultant.com with any of those types of questions, and we'll make sure to answer it. Or you can come to our next live webinar and we'll be here as well. So for today, if you're new to FedEx, it's a term that we're focusing on that you might have never heard of, but it's the idea of a scale limit and what that means. And it's something we've talked about before, but we always want to make sure to update everybody on what it is and how it's affecting the space today. And this is something that's been around in various ways for years and years in the FedEx space. But as to what it actually comes out to and the way it's applied on a weekly and yearly basis, it ends up being a little bit ambiguous. And FedEx does that intentionally to give themselves flexibility here. So I'm going to make it as clear as I can today and give everyone advice on whether you're considering getting into the space or you're already an operator, how it affects you and what you should be paying attention to. So just to make it simple, I'll start with a quick overview of what I mean when I say scale, just in case that is something you haven't heard before. And it really refers to a couple of things. The first is a scale limit. So that is a limit that is imposed by FedEx at the terminal level, where they don't want any one contractor to be larger than a certain percentage of the stops at that entire terminal. So the limit, for instance, could be 30%. And what they're saying is that FedEx doesn't want anyone to be more than 30% of the stops at a given terminal. Now, the reason for this limit is it's pure risk analysis on FedEx's part. They don't want any one contractor to be larger than a level they are comfortable with, because basically they don't want someone to be so large that they could essentially blackmail or threaten, threaten to essentially stop service and shut down that entire terminal, or to be at the point where if that contractor failed, then the terminal shuts down anyway. So scale is essentially a way for FedEx to set that upper limit as a risk ceiling for them and basically protect themselves. And so I'd imagine there will always be some kind of scale limit in the FedEx equation, but that limit does change. And we'll talk some about that in a little bit. Now, importantly, scale is at the terminal level. So it's not going to be 10% of the packages across the country or in the state. It's always done at the terminal level. So what that also means is you could grow up to the scale limit at every terminal in the country. So this is not a limit on how large you can get in the entire FedEx network. It's just a limit on how large you can be at each individual terminal. Now, that is for P&D. So a quick aside on the line haul is that line haul is not done at the terminal level. It's done at the district level. So if you have ever seen a map of every terminal that FedEx has, the country is actually divided up into 26 different districts by these little blue lines on the map. And so if you haven't seen one of those, we can help you kind of understand how the country's broken out. But generally, the line haul limit is said to be 15 runs per district. So you can keep running until you get up to, or keep growing until you get up to 15 runs. Then you have to go to the next district. And 15 runs in line haul is a pretty significant business. But this is also a gray area. And even, I'd say even more so than P&D, where I see scale exceptions all the time. But it's just important to kind of be aware of what the potential line is that FedEx is going to draw, so that as you get closer to it, you may realize that there might be some things you have to do, some conversations you may have to have with a terminal manager or a district manager to get an approval above a scale limit. But again, there's always a next district over, and it's also why you can look at, there are several terminals that exist on the edge of districts where, or even there are sister terminals where there's a terminal on either side of a district line, and you could be at scale at both of those terminals. So 15 runs at both of those terminals and be essentially they're in separate districts. But, you know, for you, everything's operating out of almost the exact same place. And there's a few of those places across the country. And so there's some strategy there, but really what we're going to be talking a lot about today is the P&D scale limit. And I'll come back to line haul in a little bit, but a lot of what we're focusing on and kind of talking about are the changes on the P&D side. Now, earlier, I did say scale refers to a couple of things. So one is that scale limit, but there's also the other side of the coin. There is a scale minimum. So just as there's a rationale on the FedEx part for a scale limit, there also is for the scale minimum. Now, the way the scale minimum works is, actually the rationale for it is basically FedEx doesn't want anybody to be too small. The way they see it is if you're too small, one, your margins are smaller. They'd rather you have a little more cushion. There's fewer economies of scale, but you also, more importantly, in FedEx's eyes, have to be more of an operator instead of a business owner. So if it's too small, and typically the level we see is if it's below about 8 routes, you can't really justify a manager. You can have a manager, but it really hurts your profitability below that 8 route level. So most people in smaller operations don't have a BC, don't have a manager. And so the owner has to be much more involved in the day-to-day. And FedEx really wants to get away from that model as much as they can, because they want you to be involved in the business. They want you to be active. They want you to be available. They want you to be able to address all of the issues affecting your business, but primarily things like safety and service. They don't want you to be focused on being out on a route, delivering packages. That needs to be, you know, kind of a last case contingency scenario. They want you to be more able to handle the things that actually improve the overall business so that you can stay healthy and that it helps keep FedEx healthy. Now, the way the minimum worked, you know, a couple of years ago was that it was about 500 stops a day, about 5 routes. And that has shifted since then. On the line haul side, the minimum is actually 2 runs. So it's not, you know, we did talk about how there's a scale limit at the district level. The minimum for line haul is just 2 runs. And if you think about it, really, FedEx doesn't want any pure owner operators on the line haul side who can do it with just 1 run in 1 truck, because that person is operating the business and doing everything themselves, driving. It comes back to what I was mentioning before. They want more of the business owner type of model, who, again, still involved. You're not absentee, but that is the type of thing that they're shooting for and pushing for. So that's why the minimums exist there. Now, when we're talking about scale, it's going to vary terminal to terminal, both the limits and the minimum. But the way to think about it and the reason for it, like we've talked about why, but this is a tool that FedEx is going to use to push contractors to hit the threshold or the range of sizes that they think is the best fit. So, you know, they're going to set the smallest they want you to be and the biggest they want you to be. And kind of in that range is where FedEx is going to feel that is the ideal range for contractors to sit from a size and a scale perspective. So In the last couple of years, scale was really a tool that they used to shrink the size of contractors. If you've been around for more than a year, you'll know that FedEx did a lot to push to reduce the size of contractors over the last couple of years. And we saw, back in 22, even early 23, that there were a lot of transactions that were halted because FedEx decided it was too risky to transfer contracts to new buyers and when they were too large. And so that's why you saw so many more carve-out deals in the past. And really, if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense historically. It was a big reaction to COVID, where there was so much staggering growth, so many people grew so fast that they were okay with the idea of contractors growing that large, but the idea of bringing in new people to take over these massive businesses just affected their risk calculation. And so that's why you saw some of those conversations start to be a little more difficult when we were looking at large businesses. But a lot of this thought process has changed. And so that's kind of where you need to be, your mindset, understand the history, but understand where things sit today. So part of what FedEx has realized over the last year or more is that contractors need to be allowed to grow larger than they were letting them grow. That is one of the ways that they've reacted and responded to some contractor complaints, because as you continue to grow and scale, it can really help improve your margins and it can really help you run your business more effectively. So we have seen a lot of relaxing of that scale limit. Now, previously, even like I said, 2022, early 23, I would be really nervous if I was talking to somebody, they were trying to buy one of these businesses, and they said they were buying a business that was 20% of a terminal. I would say, if you haven't gotten strict approval from the terminal, there's no way that's happening. But now, I mean, it is very common to see deals in the 30%, 40%, even more of a terminal get approved. So it obviously, the more you are of the terminal, the more scrutiny there is regardless, but there's none of the hard and fast limits that I've seen over the last year or so have been set in place, where I used to say 20% was the worrying number. There's a lot bigger businesses that are getting approved now. And so that's really should not be the stress point for a lot of these. And it's not going to get as high at every terminal, but in general, it is a significant amount of relaxing. Now, what that means is if you're a contractor trying to sell your business, most of the time you're going to be able to do it in one transaction and just list the entire businesses in a lot of cases. So you get to avoid the extended timeline of having to split up your business and carve it out and figure out which employees and trucks go where and find multiple buyers. You get to avoid all that in most scenarios now. It also means that if you're able to sell the full business, and this is good for both buyers and sellers, then you're able to show the full clean financials of the entire business instead of trying to piece apart the carved out financials of each individual piece. It's not that those aren't valid, and we've done that so many times that we've got very accurate financials for carve-outs. The challenge is just banks. Banks have a high standard, and if they say carve-out financial is not good enough, I need a tax return, you can't do an approved carve-out tax return. It has to be done by a CPA. So it just adds some complexity when you're dealing with carve-outs and you're trying to finance one of these. So if an exit is your goal, this scale relaxing has made it a lot easier. Now, even if you aren't selling, it just really means that you don't have to be as worried about growth if you're a contractor. If you see another contractor who's beside you, who's looking to sell or is struggling, you can most of the time get that added to your territory, buy that without having to worry about doing anything crazy to get around the scale limits. So you just have more of those opportunities, and contingency opportunities still can fit within the territory without being a scale worry, and without having to worry about the pressure of FedEx turning around and making you shrink as soon as you're done. But let's go back to the minimum scale, because that's the one we really want to make sure you're all aware of at this point in time, because that has increased as well. And so what I mean there is that the minimum has gone up. And it comes back to what I was saying before, where we're seeing the terminal push for contractors to be larger than they were. And this is a part of a pendulum swing that we've seen a few times, where FedEx moves in one direction, realizes that they try to get people too small, that caused problems. So now they're swinging the other direction and trying to find that happy medium of getting people back up above a certain level. So the way some contractors found out about it is they'd get an update on scale and told, hey, you're actually below the minimum, and you need to find a way to get bigger or sell or get out. Or some are getting told to consider selling to another contractor within the next couple of months. So that's how it's kind of played out. But again, this is not something where FedEx came out and officially posted, hey, scale minimum is now 8% at all terminals. They're also never going to say scale maximum is 50% at all terminals or anything like that. It's always done at the terminal level. You know, there's obviously corporate decisions that go into this, but it's not posted anywhere. Typically, you're going to find out by talking to your terminal manager and asking what the scale max and mins are. And like I said, that gives FedEx some gray area to be able to navigate some of these conversations. Now, the biggest risk area for those of you who are below the minimum is in particular the ones of you who end up in the bronze or even silver trending bronze range, because those are the contractors where FedEx is going to target most quickly to say, hey, you're struggling. We need you to either get bigger, sell, or we'll choose for you. So it is one of those things where that minimum has become the new pressure point for a lot of contractors. So if you find yourself now where you're in a scenario where you're below scale, there are a few different scenarios and kind of things that I want people to think through if you're at this point. We'll talk an exit first, because if you're trying to sell your business, and you're below that minimum scale, they will not let you sell to a buyer that is outside the current FedEx ecosystem, who's not already a contractor. So realistically, if you're trying to sell and you're below scale, the only person you'll be allowed to sell to are the contractors in your building that are adjacent to you, that can add to their territory. So that is an option, but it's not always an option for everyone, because you may be in a territory where every contractor on every side of you doesn't want to buy. They don't have any additional funds, or they just don't want to add a territory. And so there's no one to sell to. So if you aren't selling, what can you do? And there's a couple of things there. So one way is, like I said, if you can't sell, maybe you can buy. So if there is another contractor touching your territory that you can work out a deal to buy their business and take you up above the scale limit, great. You've navigated that problem, you're above scale, and you've made it. Another strategy that I've seen work really well, if let's say you don't have the right funds to buy right now and you can't work out a deal with another contractor to buy or sell, is that if you can go to someone who's touching your territory, especially if they're also under scale, so if they're trying to have these same thought processes and conversations as you are, is to find a partner there and combine the territories without actually exiting. So maybe you'll have that there's one overarching entity that runs the contract, but the two of you are collaborating and coordinating on it. And the goal there is to continue to grow that business. And maybe you stay together and your partners, and that works out forever. Or maybe you get to the point where you've grown it, where you can split it and both pieces are above scale. So it's a way to navigate it. You don't necessarily have to exit the space just because of scale guidelines, but you might have to work with another contractor in the area to form a partnership and find a strategy where you guys can stay in this together, navigate the storms of whatever's currently happening, and find ways to grow. And then again, might be a great partner you stay with for years and years, or it might be a point where you split a few years down the line. But either way, I would really advise you, as you're going through this, to be thoughtful of what that partner is like, and structure an entity agreement accordingly, so that you think through that and you don't just do a handshake deal if you do go down that path. And we can help you think through strategies and ideas if you're trying to work through a similar situation. So really, like I said, that's the scale that we want you to kind of think through. And there's two important sides to the story. Like I said, we want everyone to know about the continued potential for getting larger and the value that comes from selling or buying a business all in one go. It's a definite positive. When you're thinking about these larger contracts too, I only touched on it a little bit, but they're typically more profitable. They're going to have more breathing room, and the ability to pay for things like management and mechanics and things that let you add efficiency to the business so that you can step back from owning everything yourself. And the larger that NOI is that you have, that bucket to spread out for things like that, the more time you can potentially take back. And when it comes to the smaller contracts, it's just important to be aware of those minimums. and make sure that if you're in one of those scenarios as a current contractor, even if FedEx hasn't brought it up to you yet, if they haven't pushed you on it, it's a good time now to be planning for it. Think through those different strategies I talked through, whether it's growing or finding another contractor to buy or sell or partner with. But you need to have a plan, because the worst case scenario is that you wait and you just hope that nothing happens to you. You know, you're close to the scale or below the scale. Nobody said anything. You just try to hide under the radar. And then they tell you you've got a really short timeline to make a decision. You can't find a plan. So control your fate as much as you can now, and try to make sure that you've got a plan of exit or growth if you are on one of those smaller size contracts. So again, we're always going to continue to update you on these things as they happen, these changes as they happen. Change is constant with FedEx. It's one of the things you'll understand very quickly once you get into the space. But that's really what I wanted to update everyone on today. So I'm about to go through a couple of our new listings this week and all of the events that are coming up before we get to Q&A. So I see a few questions have come in, and I'll get to those in just a second. But anyone else who has questions, is the good time to start typing them in while I'm going through these listings and events. So a couple of new listings this week. We had 3 new listings. The first was a P&D listing, and this one's out of Louisiana. So 20 P&D routes at 1.375 million. And this is exactly what I'm talking about. It used to be very rare to see 20 P&D routes come out all at once at this size in P&D, but we see these all the time right now. So this one's got 24 employees, 3 managers. So again, what I'm talking about, larger, you've got more management, more staff to help you out with those types of challenges that are happening, or you can step back some from the business. There is assumable truck debt and seller financing options on this one, and some spare trucks available that are a part of the deal as well. So you're coming into a business that's larger, and you've got management support and back office support. And again, that one's in Louisiana. Any questions on that, reach out. Next one's Utah. So, and it is line haul. So 4 line haul runs at 1.35 million. And this has 13 employees. So there's some team runs in here, a manager that is there to handle all of their daily kind of operations. Once you get to about that size is about when you can justify one of these managers on the line haul side. And it's mainly newer vehicles, and really an opportunity for somebody to come in if they're looking to kind of get a low price point for a large business. It's only about 40% of revenue, and find one in Utah. And then the last one we've got is another set of line haul runs out of Pennsylvania. It's 4 runs at 1.2 million. This one has 9 employees, and again, a manager. So great on the line haul side. And it's a mix of dedicated and unassigned, and the manager actually also serves as a mechanic. So lots of opportunity here, where you can come into the line haul space and already have some operational and mechanic support to make that transition easier. So again, we've got these 3 new listings. So we got P&D and a couple in the line haul side. If you have questions on any of them, reach out to us. We'll give you all the details, give you all the financials, and talk you through it. So a couple of events to highlight. Importantly, always want to start with this, is the expo. So first week of August, I think it's August 2nd through 4th or 1st through 3rd. I'm sure somebody on my team can send that link and put it in the chat so that everybody has that link to register. But it is completely free to register. And if you've never been to one of our expos, we've been doing it for 5 or 6 years now. And really the idea here is, one, we want to have an event where everybody can come together from across the country, hear about what are the biggest trends affecting them in the space, whether it's P&D, whether it's line haul, and figure out the right ways together that we can grow and succeed. And also just an opportunity to network with contractors from across the country. It is oftentimes so difficult to meet with anyone outside your terminal. And so really, we've always wanted this to be a place where you can come together. We'll give you all the food, we'll give you all the drinks, we'll give you all the content, and we'll introduce you to the vendors and the people that can help you be more successful in your business. All that we ask is that you come out here and reserve that hotel room so that you can have that while there's still a discount. There is still a discount right now. And it is at a beautiful Gaylord Resort in Dallas, Texas. So that's a couple months from now. And it feels like it's still far away, but it'll be here before you know it. So if you haven't registered, if you haven't booked that hotel room, do so now. We just released kind of an overarching schedule, and the full agenda with all the content's going to come out either end of this week or early next week. We're just tweaking a couple of things. Other things that are coming up are our new investor summit. Again, if you've never been in the space, if you're new, These are designed as workshops and learning courses where you can come in and really learn as much as you can, whether it's P&D or line haul or any of our other silos. We have ways for you to take these digital courses, and then really I'd encourage you to, what comes with it is a workshop where we want you in person to come meet us, meet our team, meet the experts, so that you can have your individual custom questions answered and really feel as confident as you can, whether this is the right space for you or not. And then if you decide it's the right space, we want to accelerate you and help you move forward as quickly as you can. So our next one there is June 27th, and our office is in Nashville. If you can't make that one, we are having one the day before the first day of the expo. So if you're planning on coming to the expo and you're a new investor or trying to learn more about the space, if you come in a day early, we're going to have that full workshop there on site in Dallas. So hopefully that's that. If you can't make Nashville in June, hopefully we'll see you at the expo that day before the event. And then the last one to highlight is that we do have our happy hour. Our next happy hour is in Utah, Salt Lake City. It's June 25th. So if you're in that neck of the woods, we'll be there. Again, free food, free drinks, free time to meet with all of us and meet with other contractors in the area. So register for that, and hopefully we'll see you there in a couple of weeks. Okay, so let me get to these questions. So the first one here I think comes back, but I'll just kind of address it, and if anybody missed it earlier. So is there a minimum scale limit at the terminal level in terms of percentage of or number of routes? So the way that we used to talk about it, because the way that it used to kind of be, again, not ever written, but talked about, because FedEx never officially put it in many places, was that it used to be 500 stops or 5 routes. If you were less than that on a daily basis, then you were below a minimum scale. There were even some exceptions to that, but again, that's kind of what we pointed to. It is higher than that now. I would say if you're even in the 5 to 7 range, if you haven't asked, 5 to 7 route range, if you haven't asked or talked to a terminal manager to confirm what minimum scale is, you're close to it. But again, no hard and fast rule, but if you were below the limit or close to the limit before, you're definitely below it now, because it has increased essentially categorically as FedEx is pushing more people to be above that minimum scale limit. And the way that they actually look at the minimum scale limit is as a percentage of stops at the terminal. And they're not super clear as to if they're looking at, weekly stops or annual stops. It's most likely that it's at the monthly level though, just because that's how all of their KPIs are done and how they look at almost everything. So that's what would make the most sense, but that's basically what we understand it to be. How long are the contracts with FedEx? Are there any minimum and maximum terms? Most contracts are 1 year. The vast majority of contracts are a year or maybe like 14 months. We used to see more 2 and 3 year contracts come through. I would say though that those are very rare, if not unheard of these days. Reasons for it are multiple. One, FedEx is doing, they're kind of doing continual changes, especially with everything that's rolling out with Express. They don't, they're going to have to do changes to the contracts as things happen. They'd rather it be on a more rolling basis. And with the metal system and the way that FedEx is trying to look at monitoring and having conversations around key metrics in the space, they want to be able to have those at least every year and tie the metals to that contract conversation. I would say though, it's also, you generally do want your rates to increase more often than they did when they were 3 year contracts. It was nice that there was some security to that, just knowing that, hey, nothing's going to change for 3 years, but oftentimes you would want your rates to increase to kind of keep up with the way the economy was changing. And so having them happen more regularly leads to more opportunities for you to increase those contracts year over year. There's plenty of, if you have any other questions on the contract process or negotiation side, happy to help. I help with those all the time, basically every week. So next one here. Why would somebody sell a FedEx route if they're profitable? What are the reasons of sellers ever looking to get out of the space? And there's a bunch. And oftentimes, sometimes it's just retirement. That is the way it happens sometimes, where maybe a contractor is just looking to retire. I know plenty of people who've been doing this for 20 years and are ready to get out because it's, they are past their prime. What I would also say though, is people who've done it for 10, 15 years that it's not the same as it used to be. They probably came in as a where they were essentially running the business themselves, a driver, an operator, or started small and grew it to where it is. But there's been a lot of changes over the years, and a lot of people don't like a business model where they have to change to keep up with the things that FedEx rolls out. And it could just be you know what, it's easier for me to sell than to worry about keeping up with the changes. And it's in a lot of ways, FedEx kind of wants that. If somebody's resistant to change in this model and resistant to keep up with the things that FedEx needs to do to continue to make sure that their company is successful, they would rather somebody come in who's open to those opportunities, open to the growth there, and trying to find ways to work together. And then sometimes people don't have a choice if they're exiting. You know, that does happen where people run into contractual difficulties where, you know, whether it's a financial hardship they've run into, or it is something where they, you know, are failing on service or safety, and FedEx is essentially giving them a timeline of, hey, you have to sell within a certain amount of time, or you will, you know, you will lose your contract. So some people kind of see the writing on the wall and decide to get out before they lose it. And I encourage contractors all the time when they get to that point, because the good thing is when they're selling their business, the new contractor that comes in, they get to reset their safety scores. They get to reset the KPIs with FedEx and kind of come in with a clean slate. So sometimes that is the best reason, or the best thing for somebody to do, is if they've gotten to a situation where it's really hard for them to get out of it just because, you know, their KPIs have been hit over the course of a whole year and they know that it's not going to go well, that if they can sell and allow somebody new to come in with a clean slate, that person's going to be just fine because the problems are fixed. But it's just that those KPIs have hit that contractor over the course of a year, and they know that there's going to be some difficult conversations come renewal time. And so sometimes the best option is just to sell. But any individual scenario, there's all kinds of things I've seen. So you know, anything that anybody has questions on, I'm happy to comment on or talk through. All right, next one's Ami. So they have someone who is trying to sell to them, but they don't have any financials. They only have the W-2 from FedEx. So what's the recommendation there? So it is hard to know what a business is worth on the FedEx side if all you have is revenue. Revenue is nice. It's nice to know, you know, how much money FedEx has paid them. But FedEx routes are not valued as a percentage of revenue, at least not by us. There are general ranges I can point to. So I could say on the P&D side, you know, generally something like 65 to 85% is a common range as a percentage of revenue. But I would never tell you to buy just say, hey, it's $1 million business and I'll throw it, you know, 70% of revenue at 700K. There is a lot that you can miss by not knowing the expenses. So if they truly don't have any financials, that's a red flag in and of itself. So like if they can't provide you payroll, or if they can't provide you any kind of information on the repair and maintenance over the last year, you know, you still have to do MVRs for FedEx. There's a lot of things that they should have somewhere. So I would say, unless they have a really good reason to not give you anything when you're talking to them, it's a red flag if they don't have it. You know, there are plenty of people that may not have formal P&Ls or formal tax returns. Maybe it's just a point in the year where they haven't filed yet. They should still have it at this point. You know, we're in June, but I know how CPAs are. I know that there's extensions you can get. So there's reasons why they may not have it yet from last year, but some kind of financial, even if it's just in QuickBooks, should be something they're tracking. And if all you can get is payroll, if all you can get is fuel, if all you can get is repair and maintenance, fuel, and payroll is going to be, you know, 70–80% of the expenses anyway. And you'll have a really good sense of where they stand and have a little bit better understanding of where the NOI might be. But this, you know, general thoughts here, but I mean, if you have specific questions on this, you can reach out to us and we can kind of talk you through exactly what to say and what to ask for from a due diligence perspective. Another thing too is just getting a look. If you don't know how many routes they're running, maybe ask for their work area planner and see where FedEx is saying they should be. Obviously, we all know that there's some, it's not always black and white on if that's right, but it does give you an indication. If you know that they're running 15 routes and FedEx says they should be running 9, that there's probably some efficiency issues that you're going to have to deal with when you take over. So I know it's a long-winded answer. There's a lot of things that can go into that. It's a very, those are things that we help with people all the time. So if you're looking for those types of answers and you have any more data or any more info there, if you send it over to us, we can help. Good question here. So someone asked, can someone own routes in multiple terminals in the same state or different states? And yes, so the scale limit applies at the terminal level, like I talked about today, but you can be operating in every terminal in the country. So you could be at all the terminals in one state, you could be at terminals in every state in the country, as long as you're below that scale limit at each of those terminals. So FedEx isn't going to restrict you there. I would say if somebody ended up at the place where they were at every terminal in the country, you're just going to have more scrutiny just in general if you're that large, because they want to make sure that if somebody's operating everywhere, that they're doing a really good job of it. So if you end up in some kind of scenario where you're in hot water, they will pay more attention to it. But yeah, there's no real limit on what number of terminals you can operate outside of, as long as you're below the scale limit at each of them. I mentioned the new investor summit, and somebody asked for the exact dates. If you look in the chat, we have a link for more info on the new investor summit, but it is June 27th in Nashville, which I believe is a Thursday. I might be wrong. Don't know the exact days of the week off the top of my head. But there is a link to register on that link in the chat. So this is a question, I don't know the full details on it, but I'll still try to provide some help of what would first steps be if named as a co-defendant with a driver and FedEx in suit over an accident. My first step and my strong recommendation is call a lawyer. That should be your first step. Let them review the ISP contract. There's some things they talk through over indemnification and the things that you are and aren't liable for. So I would let them read all the schedules and make sure that you have some legal representation there, because it may be that you're completely out of it. If you have something, you should have EDLP insurance. So that's another thing it's a requirement. And so it's something to reach out to your insurance provider as well to help on the legal side, but just make sure that you're not trying to handle that on your own. That is something that you need an attorney's advice on. And I'm not an attorney, so my advice is go talk to one. So a question here from Tim is, would FedEx not allow a sale to close if it was too close to a minimum? Potentially. It's the same types of conversations we've seen where we used to see when a business was too big, but now we do still see it when it's too small. So it's the conversation the advice I used to always give people when a business might look too big. If a business looks too small, you need to be paying really close attention and ask that seller and that terminal manager if they've confirmed what the scale minimum is. And then if it's close, ask if they would approve a sale. As the seller's going to have to introduce you to the terminal eventually if you're not already a contractor there. So if they should be able to ask that terminal manager, hey, if I bring somebody in who's a current contractor, will you approve the deal, or will you consider approving the deal? They may say maybe, but if it's too close or if it's below, they could just say no, and that'll quickly roll out the deal for you. So it's important to just ask that question, try to get as much confirmation as you can, but also understand, like I mentioned a few times, this is a gray area, and a terminal manager, if it's close, might say, wait till we interview. Once I talk to you, I'll make the decision, because they do get that leeway to bring somebody in if they think that they want to. It could be that they like you a lot, and maybe you've had if you're a current contractor and you're coming into a new terminal, that you have a reputation of success at your previous one. They know you're a good contractor. They like to bring you in. Or if there's any troubles with the current contractor, sometimes that can be leverage, where even if you're below scale, they'd like to bring you in just to make you a better contractor than the one who's going out. Last one here is from John, and so if anybody else has any, as I'm answering this question, is your last chance to type it in. So he said, do they look at scale as a percentage of the terminal only, or do they have a minimum number of stops? As far as they have said, which again, it's a pretty gray thing, but as far as they have said, it's purely as a number of stop as a percentage of the terminal, but the percentage is defined as a percentage of the number of stops at that terminal. So there's no rule of if you're below 600 stops, you're out. It's basically a percentage, if the minimum was 8% and the terminal did 1,000 stops, then you're doing, and so if you're doing less than 80 stops, you're out. It's not like that. I mean, obviously terminals are doing more than 1,000 stops, but that's about as far as the math's going to take me at the end of a day. So it's really just as a percentage of the overall terminal. And so asking the question of, hey, what is the percentage? And then looking at another way to look at it, if all they'll give you as a percentage is to look at how many stops you're doing on average and look at how many stops the overall terminal is doing. And then you can work out what percentage you're at to kind of find out, because sometimes they'll say the minimum is 8. I actually don't know what you are. Oh, we looked at the numbers and you're 7. I actually don't know what the minimum is. Sometimes they don't know, and sometimes you have to escalate it to district if you really want the question answered. Because again, this is something that's not a hard and fast rule across the country. It's something that is kind of decided at the terminal level, and depending on the size of the terminal, those limits change. So somebody asked, as a prospective buyer, not a current contractor, should I pursue approval by FedEx before I negotiate a deal? So this could be a couple of different ways, but depending on what you're asking here, typically FedEx isn't going to just approve a person unless they're attached to a deal. So it's pretty hard to just get approved generically by FedEx. It's not really a thing they do. It's something where they'll interview you to consider you to take over an existing territory. Or if you go through something like Build a Ground Biz, they're evaluating if you are able to come in and take over an open territory that has no drivers and no trucks attached to it. So in general, I would say your only real avenue in is to be attached to a deal, and that's your first step. I will say, though, if there is a scenario where you're on a deal, let's say that deal ends up not working out, but you've already passed through the FedEx process once, it'll make it significantly easier to get approved again. So in general, your steps are going to be finding a deal, working through the steps to be prepared to make an offer and to be prepared for that FedEx interview process so that you're ready to go. Because there are a few things you'll need for that interview process, like a business plan, and articles of incorporation. You're going to need to figure out your financing, and there's some things that they require you to have done to even get that interview set up. So generally, it's finding a deal, working with the seller, working with a team like ours to make sure that you're ready for that interview and ready for that next step. All right, I am not seeing any more questions come in. So everybody, thanks again for being here. And thanks for always being here to ask all the questions and engage. Hopefully I will see everyone at the expo in a couple of months. And for me, it's always a treat when we get to do in-person events, and especially the expo, because I am often talking to a black screen. I don't get to see any of you. You just get to see me. So I love and look forward to the expo every year as a place for us all to engage, learn, talk to each other, and talk about all the exciting things that have happened over the last year and that we are going to continue to work together to make happen over the next one. So other than that, thanks everybody for being here, and we will see you all on the next webinar.